Sally, welcome to Conversations in Science, where we're trying to explore ideas around the scientist behind the science. Now, Sally, I've always had admiration for you. You're a quality scientist, of course, but you've had this humanistic approach in the ways in which you work in the faculty. I just want to know, does this come naturally? Do you have to think about this very deliberately? But I'm mostly keen on knowing how it is that we can train our scientists with this attitude in mind.
Yeah, I think I've got a bit of a split personality there because, I suppose I didn't see myself as a scientist from the beginning. When I first started a degree at Wits University back in the day, I registered for a BA actually. But as I was registering, I was like, oh, I really like animals. I'm going to do zoology. And so I suppose I didn't come from a sense of being a scientist and was interested in many other things. But I do certainly relate to the joy of just zooming down into a really exciting science question and trying to unpack the question and understand the world and how it's working without having the extra emotional and baggage of trying to understand what that knowledge means for society and for the world. It can be a great relief just to be doing science.
So you touched on something important, and I'm aware of your background. You've actually worked in many different environments in and out of the university situation, and that must surely have been a strength, and you've brought in all of those ideas here to Wits, and you're a great asset to Wits. I want to say that. But in that we have a learning experience, isn't it? Far too often do students and academics kind of remain entirely within a university setting, but kind of being thrust out into a different environment, one where they're confronted with the harsh realities of life. That's not a bad experience to have, isn't it?
No, not at all. And I'm always trying to encourage my postgrad students to take the leap and go and try get a job, any sort of job in other environments, because you can always be surprised at how the other work feeds into the work that you're doing. I remember when I finished my master's, for some reason I didn't find it very easy to. Wasn't ready for a PhD, but I didn't find a career pathway in environmental science. So I ended up working as a news reporter for 2 years for the South African Press Association, which certainly honed my writing skills and my communication skills, made me more understand the political and economic environment in which my work was being done. But I think our students today, especially, there's so much pressure, there's so much anxiety with this 40% unemployment looming over their heads, that they feel like that would be a risky thing to do. And so to try to encourage them that it's actually not risky and probably one of the best ways to move forwards in life is one of my challenges.
Sally, you largely work in the areas of environmental sustainability, I guess, if I can put it very broadly. And there are many problems facing humanity, and I worry about the future and how we can give hope to our students, to the younger generation. How can we give a more positive message to future generations that life can be better in the future?
Yeah, environmental sustainability. I struggle to box myself. I'm certainly an ecologist. I suppose I would call myself a systems ecologist who's interested in how kind of organisms and communities and ecosystems and societies interact with each other. And that can help give you some perspective to realize that there are many different ways that ecosystems can still function. And working in Africa, where we came from, humans came from Africa, we still have most of our huge mega herbivores that used to roam the entire globe. We had woolly mammoths, we had giant sloths. Here in Africa, we still have those mega herbivores. So we can see how resilient our ecosystems are to impacts. So a lot of my work is actually quite inspiring. I'm not dragged down every day by the current situation because I go into ecosystems and see how vibrant they are. We had this wonderful experience working in the Bikwa National Park in Angola in February, and we spent 2 weeks inside the national park setting up plots, studying the range of ecosystems you find there and how elephants and fire are impacting those ecosystems. But for one day, I managed to persuade everyone just to go outside the boundary into a place inhabited by people. And that ecosystem was delightful in a different way. You know, so many people, like as we were going out there, everyone suddenly got a little bit more cheerful. There was activity, there were livestock, there was fresh green grass, there was things happening. You don't see that from a satellite image. Someone looking at a satellite image just sees that outside of the park, there's less green stuff, and they think that's degraded. But those ecosystems are not degraded. They are providing an amazing amount of resources to people. We added another 200 plant species to our plant list that day. So that I firmly believe that there are ways for people and nature to live together.
So you've worked quite extensively in Africa, and that must surely have changed your perspectives then around science, the importance of science. Science as a means of development. As a Dean of Science, I've got to say I'm awfully jealous of folk like you that get out in the country and enjoy yourselves, but really do meaningful work. I've got to sit behind a desk very often. Never easy, but of course this is exciting, right? That you can engage with people and see real change amongst communities, particularly in Africa. Then how's that impressed on you in terms of your outlook?
Yes, indeed. I suppose I've really realized there are many different ways to do science and to gain knowledge about the world. Because one of the challenges is that a lot of the science, a lot of the research that we do in Africa doesn't make it into the global reports. It doesn't make it into the kind of dominant paradigms that are going on globally. And I see that as a big challenge that we need to fix, because there's a lot of knowledge out there. Just the way that people work, the way that universities in Africa are structured, the career pathways, the things that academics are, like in global north countries, publishing a paper in science is seen as this huge kind of achievement that everyone is aspiring towards. It's not the same for our colleagues across Africa who are often doing research and publishing it in different places that doesn't get as well recognized. So having traveled and had the fun of going to all these amazing ecosystems, meeting people with very different perspectives, but who are all trying to understand their ecosystems and understand how to manage their ecosystems. I suppose the last few years, in the last maybe 5 years, I've been mobilizing so that we can come together to provide data at a scale and in a format that is easier for the world to recognize. And that's been quite fun.
I bet it's been really quite adventurous for you. And of course, Africa has such a tremendous geographical advantage. We have all of this biodiversity that's just quite tremendous, isn't it? And yes, it's important for us to lead with our own science. And thank you for all that you're doing. Sally, I'm keen to understand a little bit about your background then. To tell us a little bit, share with us your background in terms of your early days, kind of thinking about science, but you did say already that you contemplated a degree in the arts. But what inspired you then in your early days to take science seriously? Perhaps your science teacher, or was it your parents, or was it your grandparents? Who would you say that you really credit greatly for inspiring you to take up the challenges around which you currently work?
I think I had the luxury as a young person going to university to just follow my nose about what interested me. I realize more and more that that is a huge luxury. Most people today don't have that. There's a lot of social pressure to study something that'll get them a job or study something that their parents did. Having the freedom to just follow your interests was something that I value a lot. So I didn't really realize how fascinated I was by biology. In retrospect, now that I'm a plant ecologist, yes, I spent hours and hours when I was young in the garden taking plants apart and flowers to see how they worked. But that wasn't something that I was aware of as a potential career. So I think my true inspiration probably came at university when I met amazing scientists who showed me kind of understanding evolution and how these amazing theories can help explain the world and illuminate the world. So colleagues who are still here, Graham Alexander was a very formative influence in my life. I started off being fascinated by evolutionary biology, actually, and the applied side, like I say, sort of came later when I realized that these ideas can be applied to answer questions about the world.
You worked with Bob Scholes. How was that experience? And sadly, we've lost him now.
Yeah, I was at the GCI yesterday, and there was this lovely photograph of him smiling at me as I walked in. It was so lovely to see it. I first got to work with Bob Scholes when I moved to the CSIR, and he, again, gave me amazing inspiration. He basically just said, here's a challenge for you. We need to try to understand how sort of the tree and grass greenness patterns change through the year in these semi-arid systems. And then he just left me to my own devices. And every time I had a problem, I would go to him and say, this is my problem. And he would help me solve it and then give me total freedom. And then I was like, I can't solve this problem behind a desk. I can't just use remote sensing. I need to go to the field. He was like, go to the field, Sally. So the amount of trust that he gave me and the freedom to ask questions, as well as the guidance in particular points when I was stuck about how to solve those problems, was really helpful. And I try to provide that to my students as well. It's this balance between giving students freedom to explore and helping them to overcome their problems so they don't just get stuck in a loop. That is the challenge with postgraduate supervision.
It's all about developing the next generation, and you've been very keen on student development, which I appreciate greatly. Ndoni Nkunu, who passed away a couple of years ago, that left a lasting impression on you. Just share with us very briefly your work with her and the legacy that she leaves behind.
Again, we were actually, we are working at the moment on this program called the Future Ecosystems for Africa program. And although Ndoni was a PhD student when I knew her, she was supervised by Bob. And when Bob passed away, I took over supervising her project. Her research was very intimately linked to the work that we were doing, looking at how resilient farming communities in Zambia are. And just last week, we were thinking around the loss of Ndoni, because the way that she communicated science to people and the inspiration that she gave to people when she was talking around climate change issues was really valuable. And now that we're reaching a part, like she was there at the beginning at our initial workshop for the Future Ecosystems program. And now 3 years later, we're starting to have results and we're wanting to communicate them to the world. And I'm like, oh, Ndoni, if you were here, we could be kind of growing and building on the legacy that you've left.
So finally then, Sally, how do you think about the future of this broad area that you're working in? I don't think that we're just simply ticking over, because the entire environment is changing for a multitude of reasons that you know all too well. But there's hope in the sense that we can drive our science to much greater extent. There are new methods that are coming online, data science methods around artificial intelligence, but also much more sophisticated instrumentation. So I would say that we have a better means of understanding our environment and hopefully be able to kind of make smarter decisions and ultimately then to be able to impact on policy and so on. But share with us your thoughts about the future from a scientific perspective then.
I think it builds on the question you just asked me. One of the things I found the hardest in my career is that I started out just interested in ecology because I'm fascinated in how the world works. And now, especially in the last few years, but actually throughout my career, there's this expectation that ecologists and environmental scientists will help us to solve the pressing problems of the world. But I've always known, and it's become more and more clear to me, that ecology and environmental science and understanding the carbon cycle is not going to solve those problems. It's really about our economics and our politics. And so I suppose I've actually made a resolution that every time I stand up and give a talk, I'm going to start with a slide that says, I have a lot to offer the world in my discipline. There's a lot of knowledge that's interesting and useful, for managing our Earth system. But it's certainly not enough, because actually we need to make really big changes into how we run our economies and how we manage our socio and political environments. So that would be my challenge to people, is don't expect the environmental scientists to solve these problems. We need to address it using interdisciplinary methods, but also all of us individually understanding that our lifestyles have to change.
So thank you, Sally. Really, I so appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us within the Faculty of Science and broadly within the university. But these are the very ideas that I'd like to see being integrated into the Faculty of Science, the more humanistic side to science. And that's where the future lies. I think there's a great future for science, so long as we straddle these boundaries in effective ways. And certainly that's what I'd like to see the Faculty of Sciences at Wits University reach for the stars for. Thank you so much indeed.